everyone, and welcome to this week's That's Mental Mate. I'm joined this week by our very first podcast collab, should I say. I've got one of the co-hosts of the Man Hug podcast, Dean McShane. He's a mental health nurse and a senior lecturer of mental health. I'm guessing that's in John Moores, is it? In Liverpool?
It is, yeah, in Liverpool, yeah.
I'm a fellow alumni, so I stand by
Brilliant.
that. It's been a couple of years since I've been there right now. I think it's 10 years this year since I started in John Moores.
Yeah, amazing.
Great memories.
Yeah,
Or,
amazing.
well, lack of memory, should I say, for some of the part. So we start the podcast every week asking the guests how they are.
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. It's been a busy few weeks, but we've got through it. And so, yeah, I'm good and quite excited for a lot of the things that are coming up over the next few weeks.
Like I said, you are one of the co-hosts of the Man Hug podcast. It's a relatively new podcast from what I could see. Do you want to maybe tell us a wee bit about how that came about, its birth, that kind of journey of it?
Yeah, definitely. So it started in April of this year. It's myself and my colleagues, Conliffe Kelly, Dan Cooper, and Ian Pierce Hayes, who are like me, they're male nurses and senior lecturers themselves as well within the university. And it came over a chat, really. I think I was doing some fundraising, which I have done quite a lot for a local Liverpool men's, well, it's not men's, it's mixed, sorry, a football project for men and women called Liverpool Football Therapy. And we were doing a spin-a-thon, and I got some of the lads involved in it. We had a bit of a chat about men's mental health in general between ourselves. And we said, it'd be a good idea if we started to get some of these local services in and give them a bit of a spotlight and a bit of a platform to talk about their own stories and their own services. I think, we're between us as hosts, we're all very passionate about mental health and in particular men's mental health, probably because of personal experiences ourselves, whether it's been our own mental health or sadly, we've had a discussion about the amount of men that we've known during our life who've sadly taken their own lives. And I think with that was the emphasis to see what we can do about it in terms of creating a platform where people can be educated and signposting about where to go for help within the city region, really. So that was kind of how it began. It was this idea of let's get together and we'll chat for an hour, but we'll get people on who can discuss their own lived experience, so they'll have their own platform to talk about their mental health. Hopefully that will normalise the conversation. It'll get men talking and realising that it's okay to not be okay. And then hopefully by the end of the podcast, they will then know where to go if they were struggling with it themselves, because we always shine a light on a local service related to the theme that we're talking on of that month's Man Hug, really. So I think it's 8 podcasts that we've done now, and each month we cover a different theme related to men's mental health. So we've started off with the first one, which was all about signposting, and it had Jake Mills, who spoke about his own mental health and how his poor mental health in the end had a really positive outcome from the birth of the Hub of Hope, which is one of the now #1 signposting apps in the country for mental health. We've also had a theme on addiction. So we were really lucky to have Chris Kirkland come on for that one, who's an ex-Liverpool goalkeeper who spoke really openly and honestly about his own addiction to painkillers and the impact that had on his mental health. And then we've covered lots of other topics since, really, from sexuality to connectivity. And we've just done one which is due out now, and that's about happiness as well. So we're covering lots of different themes. But as I say, the most important thing from it as well is giving people a platform and then showcasing where people can actually go for help when they need it.
I listened to the one today. I think it was the one on sexuality. Was that with Pete Price?
Yeah.
And I remember, I think Pete Price was actually a guest lecturer. I did journalism. I think it was something to do with Crime Stoppers.
Right.
Like I say, it was so long ago because I was sitting all day being like, how do I remember? I obviously remember him from the radio and stuff and pantomimes. I think I've seen him in a few pantomimes because I did journalism and I did a lot of reviews. I think he was in the Empire for something, and I reviewed it. But I definitely remember him being in my building and being there. It was something to do with Crime Stoppers, but I can't actually remember
The thing
what it
with
was
Pete
about.
Price and Liverpool is he's obviously got a reputation. He's quite loud and flamboyant and very opinionated and everything. But people don't know that he had this horrific story of aversion therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So we really wanted him to get on to talk about, the impact of such a horrific experience of aversion therapy when he was 18 years old. And then, as I say, we then brought in, basically going full circle, we brought in Gyro, who are Gay Youths Are Out, which is an amazing organisation in Liverpool where LGBTQ plus young people are able to go and express themselves and receive the right support and counselling in coming out, or if they're victims of homophobia or biphobia or transphobia or anything like this. So it was amazing, and I think Pete found that as well quite moving. He said at the start that if he had that kind of support when he was that age, it'd be a totally different story, which was extremely powerful as well.
Yeah, you can tell how it affected him the way he was speaking. I don't want to give too much away because I would urge anyone listening to go on and give it a listen. Because I was sitting, I was working and sitting listening to it, and I was just shaking. I found myself just shaking my head.
Yeah,
It's how
we did.
amazing, like how we've come on so much, and how I probably said amazing there, and you probably weren't expecting that, but it's just someone of my age can think that was a thing, and that was what was happening. That was what was normal.
That's exactly it, Brad. And I think Pete touches on that, doesn't he? In the sense where he says, I think a lot of young people now might not realise the often brutality and everything else that went along with being a homosexual in those times, like he did, and often the violence that went along with it. But then, as I say, the horrible aversion or conversion therapy that brutally, assigned to in these what were asylums at the time.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. I think I wanted to get you on because we are kind of covering the same thing. We are not that that's a bad thing. We aren't enemies when we're like allies, because we want to get the word out. We want the same kind of messages. So I thought it would be good to get you on and have a wee conversation. You said you're one of four. I think I can agree with you about men's mental health. I was more or less the same. I wanted to start this because of my struggles as well with my own mental health. Luckily, I've come out of it a good bit now. I can see I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think I'm through the tunnel now, but obviously I have friends and family and co-workers that maybe aren't. And there's people that have never had problems with their mental health, and they might sometime in the future. So it's always good to get that conversation started, even if it's something really simple, or if it's something catastrophic. Like we've had some people on talking about horrible things. We've had people on talking about just everyday things, which isn't to look down on, but it's good that we both are doing something to try and help. And I suppose back whenever I was a student, I know you say you're trying to get like the students involved. Back when I was a student, it was more the likes of Netflix documentaries, that kind of thing. Now, going forward, it's all podcasts. It's the generation divide, isn't it?
It is, yeah, you're right. And I think, you were saying there about, it's so important that we just normalise the conversation. I think that I always go back to the point that we all have mental health. It sounds really stupid when you say it like that, but I remember I went to do some training for a company, and it was a room full of construction work. It was all men, and it was just some mental health awareness. And I said at the start, how many of you have got mental health? And none of them put their hands up because they all thought mental health meant mental illness.
Yeah.
So yes, exactly. They all thought it as a negative. And that was kind of within, that culture. You don't talk about mental health because, that's to do with mental illness. So I was able to start the session off with just that actually, do you know what? We've all got mental health. We've all got minds, and it's just the health of your mind and everything that goes along with it. And at any point, just like your physical health can be poor, your mental health can be poor. And it's just these basic conversations that still sadly need to be had with, certain sections of our communities, really.
And you say that you're a mental health nurse and a lecturer in mental health.
Yeah.
Is that so? Do you kind of divide your time between both, or is one more prominent than the other?
Yeah, so these days I worked for the NHS for a long time as a mental health nurse. Pretty much all of my working career has been in mental health. I started off as a support worker in a day centre many years ago, and then ended up going into the nursing route, which I loved. I mostly worked with children, adolescents, and then young males in particular, actually, who were experiencing psychosis, and I did that for a long time. One of my roles as a mental health nurse was going into schools as well, so doing education sessions for basically students who are doing their GCSEs or A levels. So I do a lot of sessions around that, and that's how I kind of fell into education by accident. And then I've been a lecturer now for about 8 years now. So I'm actually now teaching the next generation of mental health nurses how to do it, and hopefully how to do it properly and compassionately as well, really, you know.
And what experience in both of those roles have you seen any common themes that have affected both the mental health professions going forward now and what you went through, or do you think there's vast differences
in terms of the sort of workforce, or
in terms of the problems that people are experiencing?
Yeah.
Like I know you can argue the likes of social media can affect it, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, it's very interesting, and I think if you look at kind of historical stages of mental health within sort of UK and Ireland, it is quite interesting, because when I very first started, when people became unwell, a common theme would be around religion, in a sense. So a lot of people would either feel, say for example, they were experiencing psychosis, they would either hear, the voice of God or Jesus, or they'd be persecuted by devils. And then through sort of like the late 90s, these sort of psychosis then had more of a theme around being monitored. And I think that was kind of, the Big Brother culture. So CCTV and people and being monitored, and obviously the Big Brother generation. So kind of, it's been interesting to see kind of shifts and patterns of people's mental health based on kind of societal norms as well, really. In terms of, social media, again, from when I first started my career, there was no kind of social media, in terms of the internet and things, it was very little use. And in terms of mental health back then, again, it was kind of those themes I just spoke about. But yeah, I think now, especially with young people, there is kind of a lot more around the social media in terms of cyberbullying. We know the impacts that has on mental health. This perception of how we should look based on things such as, other people's lives, and, the Instagram generation and things like this. So yeah, there has kind of been a lot of shifts in terms of kind of like how society's moved and how technology's moved as well, really, Brad, yeah.
Have you seen, you said about the psychosis, about the voices of God, and then it moved on to the Big Brother. Mm-hmm. Was there any about COVID, about they're chipping you and that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. Again, it's kind of a big thing, isn't it? What we always tend to see, whatever's in the news, it plays a bit more into our conscious, doesn't it? So I remember sort of when COVID was emerging, there was we've seen a bit more of a peak in obsessive compulsive kind of traits, and again, kind of, that hand washing, and which can lead into it's led by anxiety, isn't it, really? So your mind's actually telling you to be over cautious, and then from that, this kind of ritualistic behavior, which is based from a severe anxiety, is formed. And again, kind of what you were just saying there in terms of sort of like psychosis, again, there was whatever's kind of prevalent within the news then often will be kind of taken into the conscious for when people become unwell with the likes of things like psychosis. It really is quite fascinating.
And I know your time as a mental health nurse, maybe you can't really talk a lot about it, but is there any prevalent stories that kind of stand out about the likes of mental health, or anything that's good or bad, I suppose, that you talk about often? Or
yeah, I mean, it's one of those, for my teaching tools, for when I'm actually teaching student nurses, I always use case studies, to be honest, Brad. I've got, and I'm quite lucky that I mostly use successful ones. I use ones of stories of people's recovery, things that have actually helped them, and I kind of build on that. In terms of like anything that's kind of negative, obviously that's kind of one of the big things that healthcare is always based on, is how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? So again, we use a lot of those stories as well to kind of make sure that those positive changes are made within sort of in people's sort of future recoveries and therapies as well. Really, I have lots of different stories, really, to be honest. As I say, lots of successful ones, lots of really happy ones in terms of young males in particular who I've worked with, who I've been able to get well and work with their families very closely. And the best thing then is discharging them back to reality, back to their own, the care of their GP, and back on with their lives. One of the big things I've always been very passionate about is utilising local services. So as a mental health nurse, I helped set up one of the first mental health football leagues within the city. And that wasn't just to get sort of lads playing football. It was to get lads in particular building up a social network again. Because what I did find was, if, for example, you're a young male who has a diagnosis of psychosis, one of the first things that goes is your social circle. Your friends don't know kind of how to support you. Maybe they have common misconceptions about mental health. And that was very sad for me to see. So when I very first started in my big sort of journey of mental health nursing, that was one of the things I was very key in doing, was not just kind of, looking at the medical model. It was about actually how can we actually help people to stay, integral parts of the community, and how can we help them with their social circle. So I've always been a big sort of passionate believer in the use of sports and the use of music, arts, helping, encouraging people back to education or employment, and which again comes in very sort of individual forms. And I'm a big sort of passionate person about the outdoors as well. So, I've ran walking groups, allotment groups, fishing groups, anything that will just kind of get people together around who've experienced the same things, so that they can hopefully form other relationships with other like-minded people as well, really.
I actually can't think now, but I listened to that many podcasts and that many documentaries and stuff since starting this podcast about mental health. But there was someone I was speaking to, and I think, do you know what it was? It was a doctor. I can't remember his name, but it was on the Men podcast, Matt Willis. And it was, he's quite a famous doctor. His name escapes me now, but he was actually talking about a patient and how he got to the root cause, that he just lost his social circle, like you said. And he was like a late 30-year-old man. And he was like, do you have any hobbies? And he was like, well, I used to play five-a-side when I was a teenager, and I really enjoyed that. But like, that was 20 years ago. And he goes, why can't you do that? Like, your friends would probably enjoy that. And he came back in 6 weeks, and he said he was like a completely different person. He reached out to his friends. Through reaching out to his friends, they had the five-a-side football on, say, a Saturday daytime, but also he was meeting them for coffee, meeting them for a drink. And he said that was something so simple. In 6 weeks, he didn't give him any medication. He didn't give him any therapy. And it was something as simple as that. And it's like, that's, I kind of responded to what you said, that sometimes it can be that simple. Like, people think they're going to have to spend tens of thousands of pounds in therapy or money on drugs or.
That's it, Brad. And I think, one of the big things that we've learned from the podcast as well is that, in particular, men, they talk in different ways. If you were to say to, a 60-year-old scouser who was a docker, go and do some CBT therapy, he'd probably stick two fingers up at you and say, that's not for me. Whereas if you say, well, actually, no, there's a gang of fellas and they meet every Thursday and they walk up and down the prom and they go for a cup of tea. Do you know what? They'd be more likely to actually engage and talk with people there. And that's for me, has been the most powerful thing of this podcast, is seeing how there's so many amazing things on your doorstep that happen, which produce amazing results, better than medication at times and better than sort of therapy, sort of one-to-one therapies. but at half the time people just don't know what exists on their doorstep. And I think that's one of the important things is, you know, if you can signpost people and tell people that these types of things exist, you don't know how much of a difference it can make to people, you know, and the changes that it can have on their life.
And you said that you mostly focused on like adolescent males. I suppose I was going to ask you, but there's no point in asking you because people are probably sick to death of hearing the reasons why men don't open up. But did you see that was the main reason in these men and why they didn't open up and why they were feeling down because of just the you know, the man up, the chin up, that kind of thing? Did you see a common thread in all those?
Yeah. I think the common thread at the time was the societal perceptions of mental health. You know, I used to get young males who would come, you know, for the assessments, and they would be physically shaking because their perception of mental health was, you know, that they maybe watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest once or something like that, and that's exactly how they picture mental health. So it started from that, you know, meeting them in the waiting room and just saying, you know, I'm just here to help you. Let's just talk and whatever we can do. And often, you know, it's ridden those misconceptions with people about what modern day mental health is, you know. And for me, I think when you are trying to get men to open up, you shouldn't kind of just dive straight in with that. You know, you shouldn't dive in with, oh, just tell us about your mental health. Just try and just see them on a human level first. And I think that's one of the key things I always did. Find out what they used to do and, you know, what they're still good at and what things they're doing as coping strategies now. So, you know, I'd always just talk about football and music and things that they enjoy. And eventually I think they'd say, oh, actually, you know, this lad's, he's half decent. He's all right. He's not wanting to just throw medication down my neck, and I can feel confident in talking to him about things, really. So yeah, I think it's a lot of different reasons, isn't it, why people haven't and do bottle things up. And I honestly, I think we've come an awful long way in making mental health much more friendly in terms of services. And I think COVID was one of the big things, to be honest. I think, you know, prior to COVID, a lot of people didn't really know much about how to manage their own well-being. They didn't know how to reach out and talk with people. And I think when we had those periods of lockdown and isolation and all the rest of it, I think it was amazing to see how much people's knowledge improved around things that they should do for their own well-being. And I think with that as well came a bit more knowledge around mental health for a lot of people. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Did you see that the block with trying to speak to them males? Did you see that the block was so much harder than, say, a female, or was it definitely
I think so.
A wall there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've hit blocks, I've hit walls with both male and female, in honesty. But yeah, I suppose more in males in particular. I think as well, you know, when I very first started my nursing career, I was working in one of the most deprived areas in the country at the time. So again, it was very, very sort of working class area, but a lot of the industry had been closed down, and there was a lot of deprivation there and poverty. So again, you did have, as you said there, that kind of culture of people, you know, wanting to, you know, being told pull your socks up and, you know, get on with it type of thing. So there was that kind of societal tint on it, where it was just like not actually helping. It was preventing people coming forward and having these conversations. I've also noticed as well in a lot of areas around the Northwest, in particular kind of ex mining towns and dockers areas, shipyards, and areas where they kind of like rugby culture as well. Again, you know, you're teaching young people at a very young age to not show any pain, aren't you, in these kind of areas, in these sports. So again, it's very interesting to see that the rates of mental health are often quite poor in those areas because of kind of how they've been taught. So I think getting into schools early is key. You know, it's good to see that over the years, Ofsted in particular have been quite hot in saying, right, and it now needs to be delivered in schools from a younger age, so that young people do feel that they can just talk about their mood and their mental health whenever they want, really. So yeah, it's going the right way, I hope, anyway.
No, that funny. That was actually one of my episodes is with another fellow LJMU. She did early years, and then she went on to do a psychology degree, or a psychology master's, sorry. And she's now working in a school in Lancashire, and she says mindfulness is her way forward. She says she's a class of 4-year-olds, and at least once a day, or maybe a couple of times a day, she tries to like get them to express their emotions, and she says that's the way forward. And hopefully, with them learning so young, they can grow up and develop those skills and communication skills and foundation years.
That's brilliant, isn't it? And you know, if you look at kind of the principles of mindfulness, you know, in the Western world, we've been rubbish at it, haven't we? You know, we don't take any time to just focus on the now. Whereas, you know, countries in sort of Asia have been doing this for centuries, and obviously have a better sort of level of mental health. But I think it's really key to reiterate that point with not just sort of young people as well, but, you know, adults at any age, that where our minds in the Western world, we're always either worrying about something tomorrow or a few weeks down the line that we haven't got much control over, or we are just constantly dwelling on things that we did in the past. And both of those things just add to our sort of anxiety levels, don't they, really? So I think utilising mindfulness in any way that you can, for a few times a day, I think it's an amazing thing for our own stress levels. I interviewed a guy at the weekend for the next podcast who runs a fishing project in Liverpool. And it was really interesting because I said, do you realise how much you're utilising mindfulness? Because, you know, whenever you're focusing on a float or your rod tip, you're actually just concentrating on that actual millisecond. And I think he said that was one of the key things was the ecotherapy, in a sense. It was, you know, being in the green spaces with the nature and the water and the sounds of the ducks and everything else. But yeah, it's that kind of concentrating on something there and then, rather than letting your mind go into overdrive like we do all of the time. So bringing mindfulness in, it's not just kind of colouring books or, you know, doing a bit of Zen yoga, is it? You know, you can be mindful in a million ways. You know, get in the shower and just focus on the water blasting you in the face for a minute. That's mindfulness, you know. So yeah, it's a big thing. And I say I'm a big advocate of it in however you can do it, in whatever ways. But yeah, it's something that we should all be doing on a daily basis, really.
And can I ask about, you said about the football, should I say team or club, should I perhaps say, did you implement that in that? So you kind of had, like, the way I think about it, I'm not a big I don't like football at all. Yeah. But I remember going to like youth clubs when I was younger, and you could split off and do bits and pieces. But in like clubs like Gadas, or like the football time, and then there's a cool down period where they were encouraged to speak, or
it wasn't really about encouraged to speak. One of the things that I found really powerful about the football was the friendships that were formed. For me, that was so valuable. So the football, even if you weren't a keen footballer, it wasn't about that. It was about coming together, having a bit of a kick around. You know, for the sessions that we'd run on a Friday, for example, we wouldn't keep scores or anything. It was just about get on the pitch, just have a bit of a kick around. We'll have a bit of a laugh. And then the amazing result for me would be, you know, at the end when we're collecting the bibs and I'm listening to the lads saying, "Oh, where are you going now?" You know, to other people, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm going into town," and say, "Oh, I'll come with you and I'll have a coffee," or "What are you doing the weekend? Do you want to come and watch the football at the pub with me, or do you want to go to cinema and things?" And this was amazing. We'd see incredible friendships formed. One of the amazing places which we always showcase on our podcast is called Liverpool Football Therapy. And they do exactly the same. So we had Colin Dolan on one of our episodes, who's a guy who lives with bipolar himself. And he's created lots of different sessions across Liverpool, exactly the same type of things, open to all genders, open to anyone who's struggling with their mental health. You know, you don't know referrals or anything. You just turn up, you play football. If you want, you can play within their league as well. They've got a team. So again, you know, a bit of sort of like team building and that. But again, we had a lad, Matt, who came onto the podcast, who actually is one of the people who uses the service, and he spoke about how it's changed his life. You know, he's got an amazing circle of friends where if he's struggling, he'll go on the WhatsApp group and he'll chat with the people who go to the football session and things. So it's that connectivity, it's that camaraderie and that teamship around these sessions, which is just so valuable, you know.
And I suppose that's good. Like what I took from that was you're gaining it's nothing to do with mental health, the football side of things, but it's someone could have just sat in the house on a Saturday and felt miserable and never spoke, but because they've started that, they've gained a friendship and they've gained trust in someone to actually talk about how they're feeling, and it's great that is
Definitely.
the outcome.
I think on that as well, Brad, it's also talking to someone who's experienced what you have as well. Again, that's so valuable, you know. For myself, you know, when I would run these sessions, I'd be really glad that lads were going off and talking to other people about things that maybe they weren't talking to me about, and that's totally fine because I hadn't experienced what they had. You know, for them to then go and speak to someone, they would then realise that they're not the only person in the world going through that, and they would feel, you know, a normalisation that, oh, actually this is quite common and it happens to a lot of people. God, it's happening to this lad and he scored 10 goals today, so, you know, I'll talk to him type of thing. And that's what I used to see. You talked before about stories, and one which I always tell my students is about a lad who he hadn't left his house for nearly 3 years. He had a psychotic episode and then he became so socially anxious about going outside. And I worked with him for quite a long period, just going to visit him and having a chat with him and playing computer games with him, anything that I could to just, you know, build up a good therapeutic relationship. And I kept kind of chipping away really about, you know, oh, I run this football session on a Friday and I heard you're a really good footballer, you know. And it was quite a few months down the line where he basically had said to me, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind coming, but I don't think I'm ready to play yet. You know, I'm not very fit. And I said, look, there's no pressure on you at all. Come along, sit on the bench, just watch, just see what you think. So for the first time I took him, he was really nervous going there, and I said, "Look, I won't play. I'll just sit on the bench with you, and we'll just watch." So we watched for about 15 minutes. A lot of the lads came over, introduced themselves, all gave him a hug, and, you know, made him feel how safe he was in this environment because they'd all been there themselves. And I'd never forget the journey home. I gave him a lift home, and he said, "So you're telling me everyone there's got what I've got?" And I said, "Well, what were you expecting? You know, he was expecting everyone to have purple spots or flashing lights on their head." And he was laughing his head off, and he said, "I don't know. I didn't know what to expect." He said, "But they all seem so normal." I said, "Yeah, but you're normal as well." And I think it was a massive light bulb moment. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I think I will come next week, and I'll give it a go." So next week he came along, played for the full hour, absolutely loved it, and then he was coming week in, week out. Then I then got him involved in the team. He ended up becoming one of the players of the team, and we used to sort of play like other mental health teams across the Northwest. I ended up getting him to do his FA coaching badge. Ended up getting him back to college, and I think it was all based on the football. Really, I think it was all based on that he was in his own shell in his house with his own thoughts for a long time, thinking he was the only person in the world that was going through what he was going through. And it was so powerful. For, you know, those words have always stuck with me, where he said, you know, "You're telling me everyone there's got what I've got." You know?
But it is good because although it isn't about mental health, they know that that's what that everyone around them is going through that same thing. It isn't like a normal football team where you go in and you might say, "Oh, I've felt like this today," and it could be someone that has never experienced mental health, never spoken about mental health, and they could just be like, why are you talking to me about this? Or they could get bullied, or if they open up to someone, they could tell other people and just make a big joke about it. Like, so it is really good that they know that they're going there. Even if they're not going for a therapy session, they know that these boys are struggling as well, which is really good.
Yeah.
I suppose that helps them as well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So powerful because, as I say, once they get there, they realise that everyone there has had their own struggles. They might have similar diagnosis, might be on similar medication, whatever, but they're all just there to, you know, form friendships and what is often, then becomes a very powerful camaraderie of a football team, or a group of people who have the same passion of things. But it's just something that I've always found to be so useful, because there's a lot of things that mental health nurses and consultant psychiatrists and everyone can learn in books and the theory, but unless you've got that lived experience, it's a total different level. And I think getting people together who have that similar experience can be so valuable for a lot of people.
And everyone's different as well, I suppose. Like, they could go on and have a drink and then they could feel comfortable to speak then. Like, I know I thought of this story whenever we were speaking about people's different experiences, and people have different ways of expressing stuff. And I don't think I would mind him saying, but whenever one time it sticks with me, like, my parents would be very, don't talk about mental health, don't talk about that. I've spoken about that a few times in the podcast. That's not their fault. It's the way they were brought up. It's the way their social circles were. It's generation kind of thing. But I noticed when my granddad died, we were at the house and everyone had started to peter out at the wake, and me and my brother-in-law were sitting with my dad, and my mum was like, right, we're going to go and get this sorted. I think she was leaving my brother somewhere. Can't remember the exact story behind it, but I remember her being like, right, are we going? And I remember my dad turning to me and my brother-in-law and being like, sure, we'll stay here for one more. We'll stay here, even though it was us in a casket. But he was talking and he was like, oh, so-and-so was here today, said how good of a man he was, and said we did the right thing, and da-da-da. And I remember leaving and turning to my brother-in-law and going, that was him, that he needed that.
Yeah.
Like, he never said, I want to talk about this and I don't feel comfortable talking about that. But I think that was him kind of being like, I want to, like, it was his way of saying it without saying it, if you know what I mean. And that's the first time I ever really experienced something like that with my dad, because he would be like, lad, man's man, don't talk about your feelings. But he didn't say it, but he said it without saying it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. And we had a podcast with Alan Gibbons, who's an author and a counsellor, and it was probably one of the most powerful podcasts we've done so far in terms of the emotion in the studio, because it was about Alan losing his son. He sadly passed away in a motorbike accident. One of the really powerful things that came out of that podcast for me was that how unique and individualized grief and bereavement is. There's no set sort of pathway for it, is there? It's all based on individuals, and certain things work for certain people that won't work for others. And I just found that so interesting. But again, going on to that point that you just made there with dad opening up and talking, it's finding that setting, isn't it? The right setting for someone where they can actually feel like they can do that and offload. And for your dad at that time, he probably felt like there was a release valve, just being able to process what was going on and talk about it in that setting, really. So yeah, settings and environments so important as well.
No, and I suppose that's what we were saying. Like, it might not be at a football match, but it might be at a bar after, or at a coffee shop with someone you trust. This is a good few episodes into this now, and I just know everything's different, and there's no tick box exercise, and there's no, as much as great as it would be to have a tick box exercise for everyone, but it's just not the way life is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're all different, aren't we? And we've all got different coping strategies, and we've all had different traumas, and we're all vulnerable to different things. We're all very unique, aren't we?
And how have you found the podcast? But yourself speaking to people, have you found it quite? Are you able to kind of cage yourself off? Like, I know I've studied journalism, so I'm very, obviously I'm not a robot, but I can kind of keep myself impartial as much as I can. But I can find it's hard sometimes, especially when I have personal relationships with some of the guests. How have you found it yourself?
Every single podcast we've done has been very emotive. I'll be honest, because we're giving men a platform to bare their souls. They're talking about their lowest experiences. They're talking about times when they didn't want to be here, or they've tried to end their lives, or said there about Alan and losing a child. We're talking about really hard hitting subjects. that's why it's called the man hug. After the man hug, we have a really big hug. The guest gets a hug, all of the hosts and Nat, our sound guy, we all have a big hug, and we sort of like debrief and make sure everyone's okay. And sometimes we'll go and have a coffee afterwards and things. But I'll just say now, Ian, Dan, and Conliffe, the other hosts, we always say how privileged we feel and how honoured we feel to be in part of this, because of how powerful these stories are. These men who are being so incredibly brave and telling their stories to normalise the conversation. And a lot of these men are coming to us and saying, "Can I come on the podcast? I want to tell my story," which is an amazing thing, and that's what we wanted to set up and create. And I think the way that we've done it now, I think it's got kind of that message out there that you can come to us. It's a safe space, and what you're doing can go and help hundreds, thousands of other men listen to your story, realise that actually that could be them, or someone's husband or brother or son, or anyone else. But then equipping the people then to say, well, actually, there's so much help out there, and we'll give you all of the help and the signposting that's needed to help that person with that topic. So, yeah, we're really sort of blown away by every single episode, to be honest. I've worked in mental health now for 23 years, I think, this year. So there's not really a story that I've not heard, but on these podcasts, you often hear me as, the person asking the questions, often quite choked up myself, because it's very raw. It's very raw that we're getting people in who are sometimes telling their story for the first time, and it's a really big deal. But as I say, there's a lot of love and there's a lot of man hugs goes around for each one as well, really.
And it is just like you said, it's very brave of these people to come and speak about it. And like a lot of people that I've spoke to and invited on have just said, if it helps one person, and that's all it takes, isn't it?
Definitely. That's so valuable, isn't it? I said at the start, how sadly there's been far too many men in my life who have ended their own life. And I think, if we can make sure that we can give some kind of advice and support out there for anyone who is struggling, to know where to go if they are ever feeling suicidal themselves, or if they're with someone that's in a crisis as well. Yeah, that's the whole reason why we do it. And that's why we're so passionate about it. As you say, if you can help one person, it's amazing. We put an evaluation out last month, and again, we were blown away by the comments that we've had back from men and women who are listening to the podcast, and how much it's helping them. And also as well, kind of their signposting knowledge, how much it's vastly improved and increasing. And that's the big thing. We're big lovers of the Hub of Hope app. For me, it's probably the best piece of technology I've ever seen in all the years I've worked in mental health. It's basically, a lot of people use Just Eat to know how to order a takeaway to their house. And this is exactly the same for if you are struggling with your mental health. It'll tell you where to go in your area for the support there and then. So, yeah, it's the Just Eat of the mental health world. And we push it on every single podcast. We have Jake, who is the creator, Jake Mills. He has a little advert on every single one saying, if you're struggling with your mental health or you want to know where services are, download the Hub of Hope today, And
I know it was strange for me, because I've only really got into podcasts maybe the past year or two, but it's all comedy, like it's all comedians. And I just started this up and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get 2 listens a week. And it's just crazy. Like at the amount of people that have approached me and said, oh yeah, I listen to meditation podcasts. I listen to wellbeing podcasts. And it's a human story as well. Like, if, as awful as this sounds, that's a human speaking and giving their own account. And I suppose it's like yourself with a case study.
Yeah.
It's not it's as much as I love books and novels and Netflix and movies, it's real. It's off. I don't want to say pantomime, but it is someone's movie playing out an audiobook, I suppose.
Yeah, you're right. And, for a long time, I don't think that men have been given a platform as well, really, especially to come on and talk about topics which have often been very much kind of dismissed, or no one wanting to sort of like take seriously. And, I don't like to use the word stigma, because I think you can easily replace it with the word ignorance, to be honest. I think if people do sort of want to spend the time to learn a little bit more about mental health, mental illness in particular, then we wouldn't use that word stigma. Everyone would kind of have a lot more of a better understanding of it, wouldn't they, really?
And it's I know some people have approached me and have said, like, "Oh, are you making money out of that?" And I would never think about it. Like, I'm out money on mics and Zoom premiums, and so I'm just like, I would never make a Patreon or anything for how brave these people are being on telling their stories. I don't want to benefit and monetize.
We're the same, and like we started selling a little bit of merch and things, and because we get a different mental health charity on every month, we thought it'd be great to just donate whatever we can to them for coming on. So Dan, one of our amazing hosts, ran all of October. He ran a minimum of 5k every single day for October. And he raised quite a few £100, and he's just dished it all out with all of these charities that come on. So yeah, I think, we're kind of quite big in helping them to try and push, because the sad thing is, so many of the charities and organisations that are doing a lot of the work, because the NHS is so the way it is at the moment. There's so long waiting lists for a lot of therapies and certain mental health provision. So a lot of these charities and organisations that are filling those gaps and doing it are relying on funding, they're relying on sponsorship, they're relying on donations, or they just won't exist as well, really. So we're kind of big on pushing that as well, because every single charity that has been on our podcast so far, they do incredible work. Some of these are volunteers, some of these are extremely small sort of charities or organisations, but they're really passionate, and their referrals are through the roof, but they're seeing so many people, they're changing so many lives. So that's the big thing that we're really passionate about, to be honest.
I finish the podcast every week asking, it's going to be a bit weird asking you, because you're actually a mental health nurse, so maybe you can give me a professional answer and a personal answer if you can. We always ask, if someone's listening to this and they're struggling, they can't get out of bed, they're depressed, but whatever. There's obviously every episode's different, and that some they might not they might not personally feel like relates to them, but other times they could. If you're from a professional point of view, if someone came to you as a patient and said, "Look, I'm really down. I can't get out of bed. If I don't want to go outside, I don't want to speak to anyone." Professionally, what advice would you give? And then personally, if you are feeling like that, what do you do to feel better?
Brilliant question. I think, if it's someone else, it's always about having a little look at what's going on in their life. I don't kind of like to ever use models or certain sort of like theories or anything, but if you have a look at the classic stress vulnerability bucket, what you tend to find is that there's a lot going on in someone's life. Maybe a lot of the times you don't realise that it's even a stress. So, if, for example, they're working every day and they've got children and they've got bills to pay and they've got all of this, these are all stresses. They're all adding up and they're all adding up. So it's about what we do to relieve some of that pressure and that stress. So it's looking at other things that you can put into your life. So the big thing, again, it's why we run a men's mental health podcast. Talking about these is a big release. So talk to anyone. If you've got a friend, if you've got a family member, if you haven't, reach out to another organisation. You go to your local GP, ring the Samaritans, whoever it is, talk to someone, because you'll notice that it's relieving this valve of pressure. You're getting some of these problems out there, and you know that you can start tackling them one by one in terms of the stresses and the things that you can do as well. For the likes of, mood and depression, again, it's looking at other things that you're doing in your life. So I'm a big advocate of mood and food. We just talked about it on our last podcast. What we put into our sort of body and fuel ourselves. the basic science that I always tell people: if you eat crap, you feel like crap, So it's looking at things like mood and food. It's looking at your sleep pattern. I always talk about an amazing consultant who I worked with, who we nicknamed Dr. 8 Hours, because that's all he told everyone: make sure you get your 8 hours. It's the most important thing for your mental health. So it's looking at your own sort of life and have a look at what you can actually do to make any changes, but process that by talking it through with someone, anyone that you can. It doesn't have to be a healthcare professional. If you've got a really close friend, or say there's so many different phone lines now where you can actually talk to people if you're struggling with that as well. For me, if I'm ever struggling, it's usually my wife who points that out. She usually says, you're stressed. And I'm like, oh, am I? And that's usually because maybe I'm a bit more irritable, or, I've gone a bit quiet, whatever it is. And mine, again, is usually kind of due to my behaviours and taking too much on, so burning myself out and doing a PhD at the moment alongside my lecturing and everything else that I run as well. So my mum, my wife always say, go and do something in the outdoors. So I'll go fishing, I'll go hiking, I'll go for a run, go for a bike ride. And I start working in as well, so utilising a bit more mindfulness as well, and music is my big love, so spending a bit of time with my music and being mindful that way as well. So yeah, I've got my own sort of ways that I kind of de-stress that work for me. I say they're the natural health service, getting out into the outdoors, and also utilising music, but also talking about it as well. I've got a bit of a brotherhood now with my mates at the Manhug, and we talk about anything that we're struggling with as well, which is really nice. And I've got an amazing best friend, an amazing wife as well. So yeah, first thing I'd say, talk.
And it's interesting that you brought up the different struggles that all kind of add up and weigh down on you. Did you watch Roman Kemp's latest documentary that was out just last week?
No, I've not seen that yet.
He done one talking about the suicide of his best friend, producer Joe. Did you watch that one?
No,
that was a couple of years ago. That I think that won an award, and
that's right. Yeah,
nominated for an award.
Yeah.
But yeah, he done that one a couple of years ago, and then he done this one now about how he struggles because people are coming up to him and speaking to him on, like, he could be at the bar and someone come up, oh, I loved your documentary, I love what you're doing. I really struggle with mine, and he was kind of like, I like that the fact that I'm getting the word out there, but I'm also the mental health boy. And it was really interesting, like, how he was struggling. But he went with a charity to Downing Street. One of the guys from the charity was going up to members of parliament and saying, this is a beanbag, hold this beanbag, is that heavy? And they were like, no. And it was like, what about 2 beanbags? What about 3 beanbags? They're like, no, it's fine. And I said, right, what about this bucket? Is this bucket heavy? No. And he said, right, put your arms out and hold the bucket. And he goes, right, this beanbag is stress from work. This beanbag is you've had a fight with your friend. This beanbag, and he goes, what's happening? They go, it's harder to carry. It's hurting my arms. And I thought that was a brilliant analogy, and it kind of reminded me a wee bit of what you were.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's that stress vulnerability model. We're all vulnerable in different ways, and a lot of the time that's based on the early years of our life. The first 1,001 days, key traumas, maybe issues of bullying, maybe overuse of drugs or alcohol. All of these things that make us more vulnerable. But then when you add all of these stresses up, eventually it's going to spill over into mental illness. So when I used to work in particular with young males who had psychosis, once I'd got them to a certain level where, we could sit and chat and have a little look at what we call psych education to give them more skills to make sure that they don't become unwell again. That's what we'd always do. And it'd be amazing, it'd be a light bulb moment for so many lads where they'd go, God, that's how I became unwell, isn't it? Because I was doing this, I wasn't talking about that, I was adding this to my stress level. And then what you would do then is give them the skills to say, well, okay, if that happened in the future, what would you do differently? So it's giving them then new skills, new coping strategies that they can actually utilize to make sure that it doesn't spill over, and a lot of the things that we would look at would be things like poor sleep. We know that if our sleep's really poor, our mental health's going to be really poor. So it's looking at things that have caused that poor sleep as well. And so yeah, it's an amazing educational tool, but we can use it on ourselves at any point. If you are feeling a bit burnt out and maybe low in mood or anxious, just have a little, write down what are the things that are currently the key stresses in your life. And for some people, it'll be a bit of a surprise. You don't realise how much of a stress certain things are. You just think it's the everyday, it's the norm. You've got into a habit of doing it, or a routine of doing it. So, yeah, it's a very powerful thing.
And before I let you go, can I ask, because you actually said something there that I've not actually heard of before, the first 1,001 days?
Yeah. So it's a key thing within mental health. I know in particular CAM services, child and adolescent mental health services, they're quite big in doing education sessions around the first 1,001 days. So they're kind of are what we perceive as being the most important in our lifetime, really. So if you think about the first 1,001 days in your life, if you've had any sort of key traumas, you may view the world differently. So, for example, if you're a child who's maybe neglected, and say, for example, you cry and you cry and you cry, and an adult doesn't come and comfort you, soon you'll think, well, actually, maybe people aren't that great, and they're not gonna come to me when I'm in discomfort. So their views then of other people maybe to not show empathy, for example. So that's just one example. The first 1,001 days can be really, really key and instrumental in sort of how our views of the world and how our anxiety and mental health in general can be, even into adulthood.
That's really interesting. I've never actually heard of that term before. Obviously, I've heard of like how detrimental them years are, and your brain's like a sponge, but I've never heard of that theory before. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Attachment theory as well. It's another sort of like classic one, isn't it? As well, really, around how within that period you form relationships with your guardians, and how you then start to view the world as well. But I think since the over the last few years, we've got more of an understanding, in particular around ACEs as well, adverse childhood experiences. So if, for example, you've had key things within that period of development from childhood and adolescence as well, it gives us a greater picture of why people may be the way they are in adulthood. If you're someone who's been bullied historically, through childhood, then clearly you're going to be anxious in the world when you're an adult because of the traumas that you've experienced. So it gives us a lot of answers, really, but also it gives us a good foundation of what people then need to be able to have the right support in place as well.
Thank you very much for talking to me, and I think it was a really nice chat. It was quite weird for me as well to talk to someone who's actually going. Usually I'm talking at people and asking questions, but it was kind of weird for me to actually speak to someone who's in the same kind of circumstances as me in terms of podcasting. So it was.
Thank you very much, Brad. You made it so easy for me. Really enjoyed it, mate. And good luck with your podcast. It's fantastic, and we'll keep listening. We'll keep promoting and sharing it as well, mate. Because, as you say, the more people that are out there fighting the good cause, the better, really.
Same as you. Thank you very much, and speak to you soon.
Amazing. Thanks, Brad. Cheers, mate.
No problem. Thank you. Anyone negatively affected by this week's episode, there are a number of links in the bio to help. That's all from me. I will see you next week on That's Mental Mate.